You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
The congressman has been a doctor for many years, has great experience, but he's also, beyond being a doctor, who's brought so many wonderful lives into this world, he's also the congressman of the 1st District of the great state of Tennessee, and he's here with us on the Final Say Radio Show. Dr. Roe, welcome back to the program. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Hey, Brett, thanks for having me on.
Congressman, of course, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and one of these days we're going to have the opportunity to have a conversation when all is good in the world, and we could just talk about nothing but positive things, such as, like your career, for instance, having spent so many years as a doctor, bringing so many wonderful lives into the world, and helping people, and being there and when they, needed somebody with the expertise such as you had, and so we'll be able to have those conversations. But I want to call on your expertise, if we can, just for a few moments, just to ask you a few questions with regards to not necessarily specifics on Ebola, but just threats in general of that type of virus or disease or magnitude. And I want to look at it from this perspective. Are we prepared? And I understand with a top healthcare system in the world, we do have wonderful doctors and practitioners and hospitals and facilities. But are we prepared both physically but psychologically to deal with an issue like this if it were to go beyond just a few people testing positive?
Brett, I think we are. Certainly we are as well prepared as any other industrialized or modern country in the world. Let me kind of go back after 9/11. Remember when we were worried about weapons of mass destruction, and we knew, and we also did know at that time, the Russians and the Iraqis, and certainly we know the Russians had stored a huge amount of smallpox. And so I went back out and got revaccinated for smallpox so that I could help in case there was an outbreak. So we went through the planning stages. Many of our local Homeland Security, state Homeland Security, really got beefed up after 9/11. And if there was anything good that came out of that, it was that, is that there was some money in the Department of Homeland Security that actually trickled down to local states and counties. And we've seen it here in my own district with natural, not with a biological disaster, but with a natural disaster. For instance, we've had a flood and a tornado. And the tornado allowed us to see if our emergency services worked. And they worked pretty well. And if you go around to your local volunteer fire departments now, your local health departments, they're better prepared than they were 12, 13 years ago. There's no question about that. But an outbreak like Ebola, for instance, requires understanding about infectious disease. And one of the things that's easy to, I think, to explain to people, and I try to do it in this way, if you have a room full of people that are immunized against any disease, let's say it's polio or whatever, and that vector, the way it's transmitted, gets into that room, it can't infect anybody there because everyone's protected. If you have a vector that doesn't die, for instance, in Ebola, we think one of the vectors is a fruit bat, and along with other primates that get secondarily infected with this virus. The fruit bat doesn't die. The virus doesn't kill it. So when the person comes in contact with a primate, for instance, a monkey or other mammal that's coming in contact with a fruit bat, then they can get infected, and there is no immunization right now. So then the host, that's the person, if they all die off, the disease stops right there. If they don't, they then can transmit it. One of the things we have in this country is we're able to better educate our people than a very primitive West African country can. In other words, they have, I think it's burial ceremonies that are different than ours that can transmit the disease. And they have, it's hard to believe how backward, and I've been in many of these third world countries around the world, how backward their healthcare system is. Literally, with our social media, we can educate people immediately about a threat. Now, it makes no sense to me, Brett, I don't know about you and our listeners today, But it makes no sense to me to allow people from a country where that disease is indigenous right now to travel to this country, because you can travel without, or unless you're willing to be quarantined, because you really don't have any symptoms for the first 3 weeks or even longer in some people. So I think that makes a little sense until we get that particular epidemic, the Ebola epidemic, under control.
And you knew my next question. You knew exactly where I was heading. But, yeah, I have just a few, I guess, additional pieces to what you just mentioned, because I think that even if you were to set up some sort of a quarantine and say, we don't want people coming from, a certain part of Africa, well, people could still take a flight from Africa to Europe or Africa to Asia and come a different route. So you really have to have a complicated system in place to track people's visas and passports or whatever paperwork they have to know where they're coming from. And before they even get on a plane, say, from leaving an airport in Germany or France or Britain or wherever, that we should be able to say, no, we flagged them. They came from this area. They can't come here.
I don't disagree with that. You're correct about that, because you wouldn't necessarily fly. I doubt if you can fly directly from Liberia to the United States. Maybe you can. I don't know, but I doubt it. Or if you do, there are not many flights. But it makes sense to not have to control I know there's a lot of debate about this, and I want to say on your show that I have great respect for Dr. Friedman, who's in charge of the CDC. They're great folks down there. They're smart people, and this is what they do. But I can tell you, I'd much rather not have to deal with the epidemic at all to show we can. Why have to deal with it if you don't let the disease in? And it makes absolute sense to do everything you can to control it where it is, give those folks where they are the education and resources to treat the disease right there. Certainly, everything we can do, we should be doing, and I think are doing.
Oh, I agree with that. And, here's an interesting question I would have, and I don't even know if you would have any answer. But just because the CDC and Dr. Frieden had made, he's in charge of the agency, and of course, he's dealing with this, dire situation. But is it ultimately his call to say, whether we could shut down travel or close the borders or whatnot? I mean, I think that would be the president's call.
I would think it would be too, and one of the things that
in other words, I just want to. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to say, in other words, it may not even be his call. For all we know, he received a call from the president that said, "Look, I know this is something that maybe you even brought up, but we're not doing it."
Well, I don't know. I don't know how.
And this is all hearsay.
All hearsay. I don't know how that communication got transmitted at all, Brett. But I do know this. Look. Why deal with something you don't have to? Or if you do have to deal with it, it's a case-by-case, a very small one or two people. It's like the gentleman who was in Dallas. I mean, that shouldn't have occurred. And we should have the resources available with ICE and others in our immigration system. I would think most of the people who are coming here, either by ship or air, we should be able to fairly well find out where their visas and passports are from, and quite frankly, right now, not issue any visas from those countries.
Yeah,
and there may be other people who disagree with that. I just think it makes sense. Yep. You have to deal with the terror aspect of it. You have to deal with the worry aspect of it, psychological aspect of it, and all of that. But again, why deal with it at all?
I agree. I don't understand why you need to put ourselves in a situation where we don't want to be in just to prove that you can't. Because that's the only way I see it. Like, just so you could say one day, see, we had it and we dealt with it. Well, okay, I'd rather not have had it here.
That's my feeling is let's don't deal with it. Let's take the resources to where there's true suffering going on. I have done a fair amount of reading about what's going on in that part of the world, and it's truly tragic what's going on. And we as an industrialized world, I don't mean just the United States. I mean, your Japan and Germany and France and Italy and Spain, other countries that are able to step up and help should be doing that in a coordinated effort. It's a human tragedy.
No, it sure is, and I agree with you. I think as people, as compassionate members of the planet, if you will, we are obligated to help our fellow man. And I think that if we have expertise or medical teams or even the military personnel that we're sending over there just to help set up and help teach them how to deal with certain aspects of this type of situation. That's fine. I have no problem with that. I think we have to be very careful of checking out our people before they come back home to ensure that, maybe they need to go somewhere in isolation for a few weeks to make sure they're safe before they come back. And so it's going to be an interesting process, but I think we can handle it. I've spoken to a handful of experts who agree. They have they have a few issues with what the administration's doing, but overall, everybody seems to be, we have to help them in Africa the best we can, and I think we are.
And we are. We've stepped up, and I think to clarify you did, Brett, on what our military is doing. There's no country in the world as good as we are at doing this. I know I was in the 2nd Infantry Division, 2nd Medical Battalion. I was a medical officer in the Infantry Division, and there's nobody better at going out and setting up hospitals, field hospitals, taking care of mass casualties than the U.S. military. And what these folks can do is set up the resources and assets that those folks don't have. What the average citizen in this country thinks when they think of a West African country is they think they drive by their local hospital. That's what they see. A hospital there may not have electricity or running water, and it's just a building where you go. And many people might even be better off not going there because they might be exposed. So I think that's the thing we're doing, is taking those resources that we have in this country and that expertise we have to ramp up a first-rate medical system for them in a hurry, which they don't have the resources to do.
Right. Well said. Well, Congressman, I know we could talk about this particular subject all day, but I've noticed that there's several different things you've been working on, and of course you put out something just a few days ago on education, and this is something that John and I have been reading behind the scenes on. We haven't discussed it. I mean, we've discussed it for years, obviously. But we're looking at certain things as we see, more states fully implementing Common Core, for instance. We're trying to compare how we're doing right now as compared to other countries that we're competing with, whether it be China or some of the European countries or South Korea or the Japanese. Because it seems that we have had, gains in some areas and drawbacks in others. But I want to say this, because I happen to live in a state where we spend so much on education, it's scary. I mean, I could tell you their school systems are spending almost $30,000 a year per student. That's what some people make in an entire year in some states in this nation. So I know your state, I believe, is somewhere. I'm going by memory, and I think it was about $6,000 per student or somewhere in the neighborhood.
Probably a little closer to $8,000.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
Time you put the local dollars, $8,500, county, local, and state dollars together.
Yeah. So I think one thing that, when you look at Common Core and you're trying to implement a national standard, the point I'm trying to make is, if New Jersey is spending, say, an average of, I think, about $15,000 or $16,000 a year per student, where, like I said, the lowest I've heard anywhere is 10, and I've seen 30. But not every state's doing that. So how is one state supposed to compare to the other and implement the same type of system when the dollars don't even match up? Like, this top-down system doesn't make sense, is what I'm saying.
No, we don't need a national school board. Look, I was a mayor of a local community on city commission where the school board worked with us in it as a department of the city, and those decisions are best made locally. An example I used, Brett, was when I went to the University of Tennessee College of Medicine. I knew that I had to pass national boards, and so did the university, but nobody came to the University of Tennessee and said, this is the curriculum you must teach. But we knew we had to have a certain body of knowledge to pass it. When I took my specialty board, it's the same thing. When I did residency at the University of Tennessee in Memphis, I knew that I was going to have to undergo a very rigorous written exam and oral examination before I could be board certified. But no one ever came and wrote out the curriculum for us. So I think those things are best left to the individual school boards and states. Let me just give you an example. I last week visited a little school called Grassy Fork. It's a little mountainous community in Cock County, Tennessee. This school has 80. It's only from K through 8. K through 8. There are only 92 students there. They don't have utility water. They will have after I get through with this term, but It's the only school in the state that has a well. This is 80% free and reduced lunch, and they perform at the 95th percentile in the state. And I looked at that little school, and I thought, what are they doing that other schools are not doing? Well, when I drove up, I saw the principal on the road leading to the school trash. I saw her in the classrooms. She knows every child in that school's first name, their parents, who they are, when they're late for school, and they're getting astonishing results. You go to other schools, and you don't see that same outcome. For instance, at our inner-city schools in Memphis, where my wife taught 40 years ago, not a lot's improved during that time. So, and if you look, and one of the things that I would encourage folks, if you really want to read about education, I'm going to plug a book that I don't have any connection to at all. It was written by M. Night Shyamalan, the movie producer, The Sixth Sense. He did a movie called The Happenings about education, and what he found was if you had schools in this country that had 10% lesser poverty on our scores that we compare kids, the PISA scores they're called, that compare 15-year-olds around the world, that we have the highest test scores in the world. But of the almost 100,000 school systems that we have in America, 22% have a majority of the kids in there with free and reduced lunch. And the most important part of the entire part of the school is that first 3 or 4 or 5 years where kids get the basic skills. And if they miss them then, have a bad teacher in a failing school, they will not succeed unless they're just absolutely exceptional kids. Sorry to go on so long, but that's a complicated question that you asked.
Oh, no. I'm glad you did. And I want to say this because the county that I live in, New Jersey, they happen to have put together a school system. I mean, I know we spend a lot on it, but we have in something like the top 50 high schools in the entire nation, 3 or 4 of them are in my county.
Wow.
And they put together, I have to send you information on it because they have they're technical schools that are based on engineering and science and math and biotechnology and things of that nature. So these are the best and brightest. I mean, and the competition to get in, you have literally 2,000 kids who show up to take an exam and 80 get in a year. And of the 1,000 who show up, they're the best in from every school in the area that sends to them. So this isn't like, kids know if they're not the top student, they don't even try. So it's incredibly competitive. But I went and visited the school, and like you said, all of the professors, and I call them professors as opposed to teachers because really they almost are, they all have advanced degrees. The people who run and administrate the school are hands-on involved. They have all types of special additional activities and national competitions that all the students participate in. It's beyond. It's almost like they're attending 3rd or 4th year in college, and the kids go on to all the top schools, but they're so well prepared. And I look at it as it's a model, just like you just mentioned, for us to start looking at to help the non-competing or failing school districts. Yeah, or to just improve the ones that are doing okay.
Yeah, I'm sitting, as we're doing this interview, I'm sitting from Northview Academy in Kodak, Tennessee. I'm getting ready to go in and talk to their teachers. This is Education Week for me. I take this time in October, and it's not National Education Week, it's Education Week for me. So I'm going around and visit, I don't know how many schools this week, and talk to parents, talk to teachers, talk to college teachers, going to higher ed, going to K through 12, speak to students, second graders. I spoke to the entire class at Grassy Fork last week. We just had a town hall from kindergartners all the way through 8th graders. And this is the future of our country, Brett, and we have to get this right. And the thing that we're not getting right in so many of the inner city schools, and I feel such an ache in my heart for them because that's the only chance you've got. That's the chance I had. My dad was a factory worker. He worked, and there's nothing wrong with that. He worked making shoe heels for B.F. Goodrich Company when they were in that business. But he and my mother said, you're going to get a college education. How few kids are hearing that now because of so many homes that are broken and children don't have that impetus. My dad, I was going to go to college, and it didn't matter pretty much what I studied. I was going to college because in his mind, I could end up with a better job and a better life if I did. And I think he was absolutely right. But how many children don't have people pushing them to do that? I don't know that I would have made it as a physician had my mother and father not been pushing me in that direction.
Well, you bring up a very important point, and it's having a role model in your life, regardless of who that role model is. But somebody who's there to help guide you in the younger years, like you said, the first years are most important. Because if you get lost then, or you get lost within a system, or passed along without being properly prepared, then each year that you progress through the educational system, you're going to get further and further behind and never actually be able to catch up. And then all of a sudden you're thrown out into the wild west of the real world, and you're competing against people who may have been prepared, and they're always going to be one step ahead of you and getting that job and getting the opportunity, and you're going to suffer for it for the rest of your life.
Well, I'm going to go in here just in a second and meet with a whole group of public school teachers. And we have no charter schools in the 1st Congressional District of Tennessee. I think I'm actually pretty proud of that, because I think our public schools are working very well here. But I'm going to go tell those teachers that, look, if there's a failing school, if that school is failing the kids, they don't get a second chance. That child and that parent needs an opt-out of that failing school, and the money needs to follow the student to the next school, so that school has to compete and get better, go out of business, because we can't continue to have schools spread across this country that year after year after year are failing the students. And I know that my time on the Education Committee, I'll be on it again probably next term. I have a real passion for education. I tell people that I overdosed on it. I didn't go to kindergarten. They didn't have a kindergarten. Somehow I made it through medical school without kindergarten, but I did manage to get through. And for 23 years I went to school, and then I taught in medical school after that. So I've spent my entire life educating young people in one form or another. It's the only chance most of us have to better ourselves is to get some form, whether it's a medical degree like mine. It could be a technical degree, in engineering, as you're talking about, a technical degree in welding or wiring or plumbing or any of those things. But you're going to 7 of the 10 jobs this country is producing require some sort of degree out of high school. And when I say high school, you've at least got to have that much of an education. So that's the absolute minimum. I mean, you see some school systems with dropout rates of 25, 30, 40%. Outrageous.
It is outrageous. Well, if you could deliver one message, you're going to be speaking. I'm looking here at your column and at the Teachers Forum, and one is how valuable teachers are to all of us. I mean, sometimes it's a thankless job, but it's a job that should really be respected, because we take our children, we put them in the hands of a teacher for X amount of hours a day for 180 days or whatever it is each year, and we ask them to teach our kids, whatever it is that curriculum is for that year, and we put a lot of faith in them, but we also have to support them properly, and we have to work with them together, that we're all, sharing one voice and one common goal, if you will, to say we want to prepare our children and give our children the best we can. And I think we could all agree on that. You
are 100% right. And one of the things we've got to do is we do have to make that, it is, and to me, in my opinion, a very respected profession. I have tremendous respect for the teachers I had all the way up from my first grade class until I got out of medical school, because I wouldn't be where I am today without those great teachers. And here's a statistic that's really troublesome to me. Half the young people who decide in college they want to be educators don't do it. And that's probably the time that you should. You're in college. A lot of people want to be doctors and lawyers, and they change their mind. They don't like that curriculum. But here's a statistic that bothers me even more. That 5 years out from the time a young educator graduates from college, all fired up, ready to go teach, 5 years later, half of them have quit. Now, maybe some of them should have. It wasn't for them. It wasn't the right profession for them. But hopefully we're not creating such a morass of regulations and boxes to check off in the classroom that they're just getting frustrated with it and good teachers are walking out the door. That's the part I hope that's not happening.
Well, that's what I have some people telling me that's part of the problem they have with Common Core is the level of paperwork and compliance, as opposed to them just being able to teach and take a good curriculum that's already been created and run with it.
Does it, hey, Brett, does it sound, I kind of laugh a little bit, does it sound a little like Obamacare and Medicare when doctors are looking for the exit signs, when banks now have more compliance officers than they do loan officers in the bank? How ridiculous is that? That's going on through every sector of the economy.
I said, you and I have discussed this so many times. They can apply to anything.
To anything. I mean, think about this. I have a good friend of mine. He's a banker friend of mine, and I'm not going to mention his name because he'll probably choke me if I did. But he's got a bank, and he's got like 20 banks. He's very successful, been in business for 50 years, and he has more compliance officers than he does loan officers, and his face gets all red every time he tells me that. But that doesn't produce anything for him but a cost. It produces no value for me, the customer. I've got more paperwork to fill out. I've got more hoops to jump through, and more cost for him and more cost for the customer. And for what? I can't figure out for what.
Let me leave you with a very simple situation that I'm experiencing personally. You know, I used to be an accountant, and I still prepare a handful of tax returns. And I decided this year I was going to open up a checking account, and when people pay me to do their returns, I'm going to put it in its own account so I keep everything separated, even though it's just a few $1,000s a year, whatever it is. I said, I'm going to do it absolutely the right way so it's not an issue going forward. So I go to the bank to open up an account, and they said, you can't. You need an EIN. I said, I have one, but it's me. And they said, but it has to be the name. And I said, but you can't because when you're a person, they only give you one. And so I kid you not, Dr. Roe. For 3 weeks now, I'm holding a check that I can't deposit, and I'm waiting for the IRS to send me some letter. I called them 2 weeks ago.
So 3 weeks. You're lucky. It may be 3 months or 3 years before you ever get that information from the IRS.
But
it's funny, but it's not.
This is what doctors go through all day long with every single patient. It's what teachers go through now, trying to just go through a daily class.
Well, I'm going to put my bulletproof vest on when I go in, so I'm planning on getting beaten on a little bit. But I'm ready to hear it because it helps me tremendously when I go hear the people that are actually doing it in the classroom every day tell me what their successes are and their frustrations are. And that's where you really learn, not from some think tank in Washington, but from somebody down here at Northview Academy in Kodak, Tennessee, telling me what their problems are.
Absolutely. Well, Congressman Phil Roe, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. And tell your teacher friends there in Kodak that the people in New Jersey and from around the country say hello.
I will do that. Thanks.
We're all in this together. Okay,
Bye.
We'll speak soon, Congressman. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.